reproductive rights thing.
Why would you have some kind of special right above and beyond the woman's consideration here, just because, you shot your wiener snot into the lady's hoo-ha?
When we get into this fundamental issue of individual rights, when we bring it back around every single time, Hake, it really seems to come down to you for women, right? Like, it almost seems like you kind of don't want women to have the same kind of egalitarian rights as kind of everybody else.
Right.
And I wonder, is this kind of the linchpin for your belief structure when it comes to individual rights?
I think that women tend to bring oppression of individual rights. And so we need to, because they're for all of these things. They're for they fall for the LGBT thing. They fall for taking care, bailing out criminals and being hard on the cops and soft on crime, and just they kill the innocent. Yeah. They kill the man's baby. So there's all kinds of horrific things.
I have to say,
yeah, go ahead.
They killed a man's baby. I don't know about, maybe you got some information here that I'm not aware about, but
abortion.
I think that
by way of abortion.
Yeah, I know what you're talking. I know you're talking about abortion. I don't know that there are all that many men out there who are in any appreciable number who are like, oh God, no abortion. Give me the baby. I want the baby. I know those men exist, but this idea that like women alone are driving abortion.
Not alone.
I mean, every other day we hear about some kind of Republican politician, and of course Democratic politicians too, but for whatever reason, they do seem to be primarily Republican, who, comes out, oh yes, they paid for their girlfriend's abortion so that their wife wouldn't find out that they impregnated them.
I haven't heard that recently.
Like common. There's a fellow politician in North Carolina that came out a couple days. I mean, this is like common stuff. Like the idea that like abortion is something that is driven by women's desires. I mean, no. Women do have a unique desire on that issue, for example, because they do have to engage in the physical labor of bearing the child, which naturally is an interest that, again, as a man, I'll never have to deal with that kind of issue. I can understand that would be a pretty difficult thing to deal with. I wouldn't want to have to worry about that. And so I do appreciate the argument that, hey, they ought to be able to make that choice for themselves. If you just kind of like throw that out the window altogether, I would agree, for example, that abortion is a matter of taking the human life. But the issue of rights there is ultimately the issue of the child's rights, in the sense that, unless you have an argument. The
father's rights. Right, what about this reproductive rights thing?
Why would you have some kind of special right above and beyond the woman's consideration here, just because, you shot your wiener snot into the lady's hoo-ha?
By and large, I think it's much more common than you may realize. The women are killing the man's baby, and the man does not want this to happen, but he gets no say on it. And you may not realize, but it's far more widespread than you know. I work with Jesse Lee Peterson, as you know. He's a counselor and pastor, and he's counseling all the time with men who are distraught, and women too, who are guilt-ridden after they do this to their children, because the women are killing the babies without the man's consent. And it's so wrong.
But that's the thing. I'm surprised we're having. I figured abortion would be the thing where we just kind of nod along, and I don't know. I figured maybe the craziest thing would be that maybe you would say, "Well, I don't agree with you on that rape exception." I'm not saying crazy in the
no. I'm playing around with you. Go ahead.
But it seems like you're saying kind of like the right at issue is the man's right, and I have to say, when you think about the rights in conflict. To be clear, if we agree that it does take two to make a baby, right? That's two individual decisions, to make a baby. Even if I acknowledged, and I would probably acknowledge that there's some interest there that the man has, in creating taking the decision to create the child. And of course, I guess we would both probably agree that the decision is made when you decide to have sex, right? That's the deciding. That's when you make the decision. That's when the compact is sealed.
Right.
So I would agree that there is some right there. But given the very different nature of what the rest of the process is, right, for the man versus
because the woman has to suffer the pregnancy.
The woman has to take on all the physical risk. The man has none of the physical risk. It seems like if you're making a rights distinction, an individual rights distinction based on just man and woman, like something beyond the child, I have no idea how you could not conclude that the woman's right to not undergo a process that could very well statistically, and indeed throughout most of history often did, lead to her death, would not be more important than the man's right to say, well, I want to have that child.
Yeah, this is why you don't put the woman as God. You don't put her as the one who decide who lives or dies. She gets emotional about the suffering that she has to go through. She's doesn't want to take any responsibility for her actions. You'll even see this victim blaming thing. Don't victim blame. It's such a twisting of thing. You have to victim blame if you want people to learn to protect themselves.
I get what you're saying about being emotional, although again, I don't concede that women are particularly more emotional, really. I mean, I don't, maybe in the way that kind of we
nowadays you might have a point.
The way that we culturally, I see what you're saying. The way that we culturally express ourselves, there's some differences in terms of what's acceptable and what isn't. But I think that, do you not agree that the woman does have more at stake just by its very nature, in terms of like just more rights at issue? Like, for example, when you say she's getting all emotional about this. I mean, just to be clear, we're talking about her getting quote unquote emotional over the prospect, very real, of dying in the process.
I don't think that's a prospect nowadays, but I get the physical. I get the physical suffering that happens, but you don't hear about people dying in childbirth so much anymore.
For example, perhaps, that does happen. And unfortunately,
it does happen, but it's not so widespread as it used to be.
The United States, unfortunately, has a child mortality rate. And I hate to say this because I despise communism. The United States has a child mortality rate along the lines of, in fact, not quite as good as, I believe, communist Cuba. So the United States actually has a higher child mortality rate than many other, in fact, I think most other developed countries in the world. So it is not uncommon, unfortunately. And even then, as my fiance loves to tell me when we talk about having children, she likes to put it in perspective. She'll say, just to be clear, having a child does involve a very real risk. For example, this baby coming out and tearing me asunder from my vagina to my anus. That's a very real risk. So even if we write death off, we're talking about some serious physical risk. This kind of stuff happens. Cesarean sections, all that kind of stuff, serious bodily harm. And it sounds like you're basically saying, well, none of that really matters. You should have no right to discuss any of that. Why should do you think the woman should have any right to consent to sex in the first place?
Of course. I mean, I think.
Why should she not have a right then to consent to birth?
In all honesty, because that's the sex basically leads to the birth. Duh. I mean, women. This is why women kind of hate nature and nature's God. They hate the fact that they're women, the feminist type of women that you're talking about, who want this quote unquote choice to kill the child rather than go through with what the bed that they've laid, the bed that they've made for themselves. Lay in the bed that they've made for themselves. People have to. This is why it's the man's role to protect the woman. You can listen to her concerns and take steps to work with the doctor and make sure that the doctor is going to do something right. But you're like simping or something. I don't know. I
don't know how you could call this simping. This is a basic rights analysis to say that, okay, we acknowledge
it's not right.
Two people. No, this is very clear rights analysis here. You're saying that there are rights at issue other than the child.
It's
right?
bodily,
the man
it's bodily
has
risk. Bodily risk doesn't make you have rights.
Right. And no, you certainly have to have a right to your own physical security. You agree with that. That you have a right not to be aggressed upon, for example. If I came to you or you came to me and one of us, clubbed the other with a bat, we would both agree that is a basic infringement of our rights, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, unless we've given one other cause, aggressed first or something.
Right.
I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, the question of bodily harm is the same thing then when it comes to birth. I mean, there's a basic consideration. You don't have to get emotional to want to avoid things that cause your death or could cause your death. And what's really strange to me is it seems like you're not really willing to give any room to any kind of gray area here. Like, for example, suppose you have a condition, you get pregnant, right? You don't know that you have this condition, but you have one of the various conditions that means that if you have this child, you have a very serious risk of dying, much more than, the rounding error that defines modern birth, right? Very serious risk of dying, or suffering serious debilitating harm. Now, I might say, look, a child is a child is a child, and that's the end of it. But you went farther and said, no, we're talking about the rights of the man here. All right. Now, if you agree, I mean, do you think that a woman who has a new fact introduced, a debilitating risk, a real serious possible risk of death should have any say in her pregnancy? like above and beyond baseline.
Yeah, I mean, basically the only exception that I would give in terms of abortion, because I don't think that the rape thing, although I understand your argument, is a valid exception, because that doesn't mean that the baby should be killed, and that's just adding upon the misery, in my opinion, upon the woman and the guilt. Nor with incest, but the life of the mother, okay. But without a doubt, it is the man's baby, and I'm talking about these selfish decisions, because by and large, most abortions, we all know, are not these extreme situations. It's for the woman's convenience. She has this ego, and like you said, she wants her career or whatever she thinks that she wants, and so she's, you heard the Fleetwood Mac. I love Fleetwood Mac, and I like the songs, but she's like, oh, I wouldn't have had my career, one of these Fleetwood Mac singers, had it not been for me killing my baby in the womb, or something like that. So I'm talking about these selfish decisions, and the man gets no say, and it's a bigger problem than you realize, because we have this woman-centered kiss-up society that I'm a little surprised at you. They talk about reproductive rights. There's no reproductive rights for the man.
Well, that's the thing, though. I mean, I get the idea that there is a claim for rights.
Thank you. But
I've been saying that the whole time. Right. The claim for rights for the man, though, is just innately outweighed by all the considerations of the claim for rights for the woman. They all outweigh if we're talking about man versus woman. Now, once we introduce
if you're talking about the life of the mother, okay.
Wait. Once we introduce child, I agree that the child is ultimately the person that has the greatest potential risk here, because for them basically it's 1 or 0, right? Abortion is for them a 0, right? So I get that, but that was not your claim. Your claim was that this is a man's right, and the man's right for the man's baby is being trod upon. And I don't know how you could have that position. I can see a position where you argue against abortion based on the life of the child. I don't see how you can make that argument based on the right of the man, because the right of the man comes up against the right of the woman. And when it comes to the risks at issue and the rights at issue, the man basically has the ability to always, of course, try again. The woman has the risk here, and the man's risk is that this particular child that he has never known or will have knows nothing about because it is still in the womb will not come to fruition, right? I get that. But you're saying that is equal to the serious risk of debilitating, like death, bodily harm, even in situations like rape, where she has made no choice. And to say that even in rape, you don't acknowledge a right there, I mean, seems to me to be tantamount to saying, well, if somebody just comes up and clubs you on the street, that's just kind of just the way it goes. I mean, that's what rape is. I mean, it's a physical attack. And you're saying you just have to suffer through and then deal with further harm or further risk of harm through a birth that you did not consent to in the first place. So I have to say, it seems to me that you don't really have a position here of any consistency on rights. It seems to me, and I'm not saying this to be flippant or aggressive, but the way that Andrew described it, it seems like you've just got something against women, either for religious reasons or for some other reason.
I think that you have a very low opinion of men, that you think that the man would choose to just kill the woman for the baby. But because if a woman's life was actually at risk in any given pregnancy,
decide abortion?
What's that?
Does he get to decide whether she has an abortion or not?
He wouldn't want a man would not want an abortion to happen.
Well, to be clear, that's a slightly different question what I'm asking, because you did say he
does not get to decide.
He has no right to decision, right? He, in no situation in your worldview can the man say, okay, we're having an abortion.
Right. Correct. The man cannot say we're going to have an abortion. If I was the king.
Okay. So the man really then does nothing. The man does not have any
right, because abortion is out of the question.
Yeah, I get that, but that doesn't. I mean, if we're talking about the man's rights versus the woman's rights, or like we were talking about,
for example, there is no right to abortion.
Well, the man could make a decision. What decision? He can't make any decision, because in the world you've described, there is no abortion, even in a situation of rape.
Right.
Yeah, I mean that doesn't. It doesn't.
Yeah, and the rapist obviously wouldn't make the decision because she can't have an abortion. She's just going to, like I said, add to her misery